I love this little plushie, but basically it's a plushie that has ChatGPT in it.
When we're talking about these exciting things, one thing that I've noticed that is truly a dilemma on which way to go or not is when healthcare systems and medical professionals are looking at AI integration, there's really two options here. Health organizations can either build custom AI solutions versus purchasing existing ones. What factors do you believe should influence this decision between build versus purchase? And how can institutions ensure like seamless integration into existing workflows should they decide to purchase it?
Ooh, good question. Wow, this is a tough one. In my mind, I see it as follows. Some companies or hospital systems don't have the resources that others. And sometimes because of those lack of resources, let's just say lack of abundancy, they have to do what they can. And with that, they may have to go with the vendor that's already out there instead of building their own. Sometimes some of the things that are being done, it's cheaper to go with vendors. With that same statement, sometimes, depending on what you're trying to do, it might be cheaper to build your own. Case in point, let's just talk about ambient scribes. Everybody talks about it. You and I are getting more out of looking at each other and seeing our micro expressions. But if my computer was over here and I'm looking here and saying yes, I would miss so much of that nonverbal communication. Now, some APIs out there's millions of people transcribing that information, and there's a certain amount of money. But with open source information, open source software like Llama models, there's ways of getting that same transcription for less. And having a company, I'm not trying to promote myself, but a company like mine come in and we build it for you, and then we put it on your system, it could be way cheaper than going with the vendor. So it really depends. The second thing is there's sometimes really specific customization that only your hospital needs, whereas the rest of the country that product doesn't really exist. And if it does exist, it doesn't quite do what you want. So there's 2 points there. Number one, when we build, we need to make sure that we have healthcare professionals like us. We also need patients involved. And we also need to make sure that there's a collective buy-in. Because if you're trying to build something and it's not a problem that the physicians and nurses and staff don't want to fix, you may be wasting money and may never be implemented. Second, you want to make sure that that patient is the end user, that they're in the loop, that they're going to be like, yeah, I want this. Because it's my favorite analogy. It's like building a house. You don't want to build the foundation wrong. You want to build it right from day one. I'll give you an extra example. I love this little plushie, but basically it's a plushie that has ChatGPT in it. I'm working on different prototypes of doing this, and my idea is to put this in kids that have cancer. And the idea is I would customize it, put their voice that they like, if they like a favorite boy, female, Teenage Ninja Turtles, whatever, any character. But then when that child is getting close to the MRI, it would have NSC and say, hey, we're approaching the MRI. This is what's going to happen. Here's your schedule today. We're going to have chemo at 2:00. Here are the things. And it speaks at their level. So if it's a 5-year-old, it's speaking at a 5-year-old. If it's an 8-year-old, it's speaking at an 8-year-old. And so that's really customized, and why it would be so important for that hospital system to really go in and do it.
That's such an interesting concept. Believe it or not, Aflac has this care duck that's like also meant to provide comfort, and they have different moods that the kid could put on it. And then the duck kind of expresses that with no GPT or AI in there. And it reminds me of the example that like I drop off my 2 kids, 7 and 9-year-old in one school and my 4-year-old in another. And in my customized GPT, I have for the 7 and 9-year-old, about an 8-9-year-old level. I say, look, we're going to ask crazy questions and I want all this stuff in 7 and 9. But then when I'm dropping off my 4-year-old, I've kind of dialed it down to 5-year-old, and I have to flip between the GPTs. So that's just really cool that you do that. And to a bigger point, this is what stresses me out because I don't even have the first idea of what the answer is. But there are elements that you want to preserve and almost intentionally have applicable only to your healthcare institution in some radius, right? You don't want to dilute the same thing about clinical trials today. It's like, well, this cohort isn't represented in the trial population. So now you're extrapolating. So when it comes to some things, you want to be reflective of the circumstances in your geolocation, whether it's fitness, activity, polymorphisms, you name it. But on the other side, you also want to have potentially the information and insights of people with similar maybe genetics and polymorphisms or lifestyles where things that are being done a little differently could be beneficial, because we all know that there is behavioral bias in hospitals as well, like physicians, like you just learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
It's natural. How can we possibly say preserve, if somewhere is a predominant Latino community, or New Orleans, our diets are very unique, our lifestyles are unique, French culture, say we want to have those elements, but we also want to make sure we're including different data elements that have to do with, are we practicing incorrectly, people with similar lifestyles. It almost takes both. It's almost like you build and train for certain elements, but you also want to kind of pressure test to make sure there's not a better way externally. And, that's where I think about federated models,
Mm-hmm.
meaning where you're able to actually kind of pool all this stuff together. But the key is, again, not to do what we've done with clinical trials where things are misrepresented. Is there a way to be able to actually pick and choose what elements you're kind of testing against the greater data pool outside while preserving the inside? How do you see all of that unfolding? Is it one or the other right now that you have to pick to do it, locally versus like with data elsewhere?
You hit it right on. Federated learning, I honestly think, would be the way to do it. And then, not to hash over the same thing, but I really want people to really pay attention to, it's human plus AI working together to create that better. So let me explain. Let's just say you're in New Orleans and there's a certain type of diet and culture, and you got to match that culture with the people, because if you say, don't eat this, you'd be like, they're not going to do that. That's part of the culture. We need to figure something else. We're going to do our best. And so now that data set is different. Now, if we're able to use that data set, I always tell people when I go around the world is, we need to use your data. Forget about ChatGPT, forget about Gemini. Let's figure out data set for your organization. Now I'm training the model, but let's say I'm a hospital down the street from you, then we have that. Now these two different hospitals are training that model, and that's the federated learning for people out there. And so now he gets to get the best of my information, but he's not seeing my information, and I get the best of results from his information, but I can't see his information. That way it's private, but in the middle, it's training this algorithm. Now, where does the human come in all this? Well, now it spits it out to you, it spits it out to me, and I look at that and say, that's interesting, but that's totally wrong. And that's where that human comes in and say no. Or say, I get it, but I'm going to modify this for my particular hospital, my particular patient, my particular age group. And now you're able to do both, is what I'm saying.
And that's an option if you're building it locally, or if you're getting a vendor or a third party, point solutions or platform, correct?
Yeah. And with that said, there are some models, slowly, they're not on a national level, that are trying to do this federated learning at a national level. The problem it becomes is that some hospital systems, for competitive reasons, they don't want to share with hospital-wide. They don't want their data training another. And so it ends up being really interesting how this is going to play out. That seems a little ethical, but yeah.